Hello and welcome to Focus, a program produced by the Department of Disaster Management. I'm your host, Information and Education Manager at the DDM, Philomena Robertson. And in this edition of Focus, we will be discussing emerging health threats. A year ago, chikungunya was not evident in the Caribbean. Though first detected in Tanzania in 1952, the disease was only discovered in the Caribbean in December 2013, when the first case was detected in St. Martin and reported to the Caribbean Public Health Agency, CARPHA. Since then, the numbers have increased steadily. The disease is now considered an epidemic. As of mid-September 2014, the Pan American Health Organization, PAHO, reports that chikungunya has been identified in 32 countries in the Caribbean, as well as Central, South, and North America. In excess of 700,000 suspected cases have been reported, with more than 9,800 laboratory-confirmed cases. To give an idea as to the breakdown of these figures, more than 486,000 suspected cases in the Dominican Republic, 84 of those have been confirmed. Close to 65,000 suspected cases in Haiti, 14 confirmed. In Dutch and French St. Martin, more than 1,150 cases have been confirmed. More than 3,500 cases are suspected in Dominica, 141 have been confirmed. In Antigua, close to 700 suspected, 18 confirmed. Closer to home, in the U.S. Virgin Islands, more than 550 suspected cases, 44 of them having been confirmed. With me today is Dr. Ronald Georges, who is the Medical Officer of Health in the Ministry of Health and Social Development. Dr. Georges is an epidemiologist by profession, and I'll ask him first to explain chikungunya, the disease, how it is transmitted, and its symptoms. Dr. Georges?
Thank you very much for having me on the program, Philomena. Let's get right into it. Chikungunya is basically a viral disease. It was first described in Tanzania in the 1950s. Subsequent to that, it spread through most of sub-Saharan Africa, so many of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa, up until the 70s. And it is something that we have known about, the health community has known about. So it has really spread between sub-Saharan Africa and then into Southeast Asia. In around 2013 December, the first cases of chikungunya in the Western Hemisphere were detected in St. Martin. And as you can imagine, in this age of global travel, people and of course viruses can now travel. So of course the strains that came to the Caribbean were those from South Asia. As I mentioned, the disease was first described in St. Martin in our hemisphere. And shortly after that, we found cases here in Jos Van Dyke. So chikungunya basically is a viral illness. It is spread by the mosquitoes. There are two important mosquitoes which spread chikungunya. That is the Aedes aegypti mosquito and the Aedes albopictus mosquito. In Tortola, the Aedes aegypti is the most important vector for chikungunya. So chikungunya, as I mentioned, is a viral illness. So usually spread by the bite of an infected mosquito. So initially, within a couple of days, the person may develop a high fever. The fever normally lasts for about a week or so. It's characterized by joint pains, body pains, general malaise or ill feeling. And the critical thing about chikungunya is the arthritis and the arthralgia, which is basically the joint pains and the potential joint swelling. It typically affects the smaller joints of the body, that's the hands and the feet, but it could also affect some of the larger joints. So persons who develop chikungunya will generally have a rash and severe joint pains. After about a week or so, the rash will develop, and then persons will begin to recover. But the important thing about chikungunya is that a lot of the issues with regards to the joints, in terms of the pain and swelling, can persist in time. So someone can be sick for a week or 2 weeks, and then the joint pain and swelling can persist for a number of weeks after, and in some persons even up to years. So that's really what makes chikungunya an important disease. I should also mention what chikungunya actually means, and I think a lot of persons may have read that it means that which bends you over. And it comes from the language in the area where it was first described, which I can't spell, of course. And it's the typical way that persons who are suffering from chikungunya look. Because of the pain and stiffness in their joints, they tend to have a bent over, hunched appearance, particularly in the acute stages of the disease.
Right, so it's relatively new, but its effects are almost crippling.
Right, yeah. It's relatively new to our region
Right.
and to this hemisphere, but as I said before, it's been around since the 1950s.
1952,
Yeah.
right. What is the status of chikungunya in the BVI? Can you paint a broad picture for us?
Okay, excellent. As I mentioned, initially we had cases of chikungunya cropping up in Jos Van Dyke, and we had an outbreak in Jos Van Dyke around December of 2013 going into January of 2014. And a number of persons, between 40 and 50 persons, were reported. But you have to understand that reported case doesn't necessarily mean actual cases, because to be reported, you have to go to see the doctor has to make a report, and then that comes to the Ministry of Health. And that quite often is only the tip of the iceberg, right? Subsequent to that, cases of chikungunya died down in the territory, and we were relatively quiet for an extended period until in August of this year, when cases of chikungunya began to rise again, and particularly so in Virgin Gorda. So between August and now, we've had literally close to 300 reports of viral disease, that being chikungunya and dengue, with around 45 to 50% of them being reported from Virgin Gorda. So we're having a significant number of reports from Virgin Gorda, other reports from around the territory, and still a few from Jos Van Dyke.
Okay, so Virgin Gorda is definitely a hot spot. Are there any areas on Tortola that we have a significant number of cases being reported from?
In Tortola, traditionally, we've had certain areas in Tortola which have been, prone to mosquito-borne disease. And these generally are, for example, low-lying areas where you may have collections of water and where you have very close accommodations, right? Densely populated areas where persons may have high number of containers around the yard, which promote breeding. So, traditionally those have been in the Seacoast Bay area and also in the eastern area parts of the island. So we've been getting case reports from those areas.
Okay. Now, you alluded to it earlier, and I just want to bring it to the fore now. There is a disparity between the suspected cases and the confirmed cases. Now, can you explain what sort of testing is done to determine if someone does in fact suffer from chikungunya?
Right, so what we have is a case definition. So it's a list of signs and symptoms a health practitioner would elicit from a patient. So initially a case must fit the case definition. So that would be a suspected case. Someone who has symptoms, sees a health practitioner, and then their signs and symptoms meet the case definition. So that would be a suspected case. A confirmed case would be a laboratory confirmed case. And because chikungunya is new to the region, there's not many places which can actually do the confirmatory testing. It's very expensive tests, a very detailed test requiring specialized lab equipment. And those tests in the early part of the epidemic were being sent to CARPHA, which is the Caribbean Public Health Agency located in Trinidad and Tobago. So most of the territories around the Caribbean who have been seeing cases would be sending their confirmatory cases to CARPHA. So in the early stages of the epidemic in the region, all suspected cases were being sent, because at that stage, we wanted to establish what was going on. Once that has been established, given the number of cases being reported throughout the region, this presents a large burden on CARPHA. So they've moved to a position where not every single case requires reporting. There have been some rapid tests which have been available. Not all of them have been tested in terms of the sensitivity and specificity. So right now we're working on looking at having rapid testing available within the territory. But by and large, most people who have chikungunya wouldn't necessarily have a confirmatory test. Once you meet the case definition in an area of high transmission, such as the region, which is going on now, you literally do have chikungunya.
Okay. Now, chick and dengue, we'll refer to it by its pet name.
Yes.
They're actually caused by the same mosquito, the Aedes aegypti. And although much of the focus has been on chikungunya because of its relative newness to the region and its growing prevalence, of course, but persons are also being diagnosed with dengue. So how do you make that differentiation?
Right, good point. Dengue has been around the region for a long time, and it is a very important disease. Persons who have dengue have similar symptoms to chick, although with dengue you may have more back pain, retroorbital pain behind the eyes. The danger with dengue is if you have been exposed to several types of dengue, you have an increased risk of getting dengue hemorrhagic fever, which is a life-threatening illness. Chikungunya, on the other hand, as I mentioned before, you have these long-term effects. So it's a balance. It's two different types of impacts on the population, both very important. So dengue, as I mentioned, has been around a while. So we do have rapid testing, which has been tested and is, appropriate sensitivity and specificity for our population. So most people who fit that case definition may have a rapid test for dengue done and be diagnosed with dengue. And whereas, if they're negative, then they may have a test done to see if it's chikungunya, or if they fit both profiles, they may have both tests done. The mosquito, as you mentioned, carries both viruses. So the mosquito doesn't discriminate as to which virus it injects. The virus is transmitted. So if the mosquito is infected with both viruses, then the individual who's infected can be infected with both viruses. So you can actually have both processes happening at the same time in a single individual.
Have we seen cases of those in the
Definitely,
media?
we have had dually diagnosed cases, for sure. Because remember, it's the same mosquito. We have dengue already endemic in the territory. Now we have chikungunya endemic in the territory. And as I mentioned, the mosquito is not going to discriminate which virus it's going to inject. So yes, it does happen. Mm-hmm.
So in terms of treatment, does that create...
Well, in terms of treatment for both, the treatment for most people is going to be supportive. Right? So the treatment is going to be hydration, treating fever, treating pains, and treating any symptoms that may arise. Particularly in cases of dengue, you're going to be looking out for dengue hemorrhagic fever. So the physicians may be ordering blood counts, looking at platelet levels. And particularly individuals who may be very young, children, infants, pregnant mothers, elderly, persons who have other illnesses, diabetes, hypertension, etc. Those persons are at greater risk of complications. Right? In addition, persons who have pre-existing arthritic conditions are more predisposed to having more arthritic complications of chikungunya.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, if I suspect that I'm infected with either dengue or chikungunya, what should my steps be?
My advice would be to seek health advice, to see a health practitioner, and to have yourself examined and appropriate treatment prescribed. As I mentioned, that is really going to be mostly supportive. And with most viral illnesses such as these, there is going to be, severe illness. Persons may be prostrated, meaning they're unable to carry out the daily activities. They need to rest. They need to drink lots of fluids, and they need to be monitored for the progression if they progress in terms of the disease. So invariably, I would advise you to see a health practitioner, and you may need some sick leave off of work. Right, you may need to ensure that you're well hydrated. You'll get some information from the health practitioner to know what are the danger signs to look out for in terms of, example, if there's bleeding or if there's worsening in your condition to return.
Now, Dr. Georges explained previously that chikungunya is a viral disease that's transmitted through the bite of an infected mosquito. Persons who are afflicted by chikungunya, they often complain of joint and muscle pains, headaches, and high fever. Now, we are joined by Ms. Sasha Flax of Virgin Gorda, who is actually one of the persons who was infected with chikungunya. And she joins us today to tell us about the not-so-pleasant experience. So, Sasha, can you tell us what your personal experience was like with chikungunya?
I would say that my experience, I worked well that day. By the evening, I got an extremely painful headache. Within the next hour, I had a fever of 103 degrees. And I didn't go directly to the clinic on Virgin Gorda. I said, I would wait out the night. Because I'd heard of chikungunya, but that was the last thing I thought that it would be. By around midnight that night, my skin broke out into a rash. Then I looked up the symptoms online and popped on to chikungunya. By the next morning, I could not walk because of the muscle and joint pains. And then I went to my doctor and found out what it was, because that's when we started to have so many cases on Virgin Water.
So it was basically a debilitating experience.
Yes, it was. I experienced those kinds of symptoms for about 2 weeks. The fever on and off, the rash as well was on and off. And that was basically the experience.
Dr. Georges, her scenario that she just described, that's typical of persons who suffer from chikungunya?
Definitely a very typical experience, very typical case in terms of the high fever, the joint pains, and the rash, and the typical difficulty in moving around, you know.
Right. Now, Sasha, you also found some relief through a natural remedy. Now, I'll first say that according to the Pan American Health Organization, there is no specific treatment for chikungunya infection, nor a vaccine to prevent it. And while there's a tendency among us to rely strictly on Western medicine, some of us still resort to our natural remedies. And I think you found some relief through one such remedy. Can you tell us about that?
Well, I did get the regular tablets. I got a few injections. But I would say that the biggest relief that I got with the chikungunya was the papaya leaf. We basically took the stems out of the leaves and then pounded them and added water until we turned it into a liquid. I took 2 tablespoons of that in the morning and 2 in the evening, and that is what I would say cured me from the chikungunya.
Dr. Georges, from a medical perspective, what's your take on that, and how can we balance Western medicine versus natural remedies?
Right. I mean, it's very difficult to comment, you know, because I don't know how she compounded it, what's the dose, what's the dosing regimen. She said 2 teaspoons in the morning.
2 tablespoons in the morning and 2 at night.
Right, so it's very difficult, you know, because I mean, when you have medications and pharmaceuticals, you know exactly what the active ingredient is, you know what the dose is, you know the side effects and complications. So it's very difficult to comment, you know, scientifically on that. But I don't know, we come from the Caribbean, and in the Caribbean we are accustomed boiling bush and doing different things. And not to completely discount that, because a lot of medications have come from natural you know, products.
Okay. Well, Ms. Flax, I trust that you are properly healed now, are you?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining us today to share that experience.
Thank you.
The number of confirmed cases of chikungunya in the BVI seems relatively low when compared to other Caribbean territories. For example, we've had more than 1,150 in Dutch and French St. Martin, 2,000 plus in Puerto Rico, more than 140 in Dominica, in St. Lucia, 120, close to 80 in the Bahamas, more than 300 in St. Vincent. Dr. Georges, what do you think can be attributed to the relatively lower numbers that we are seeing in the BVI when compared to elsewhere in the region?
Right, as I alluded to before, the process of confirming a case, you know, it involves, for example, someone coming to the physician, there being laboratory testing. So looking at the different territories, the different capacities in the different territories. And of course, different territories are different sizes, and they have different surveillance systems. So for example, in Puerto Rico, there's the CDC in Puerto Rico. The French have their testing capabilities, whereas the rest of the English-speaking Caribbean rely on CARPHA. So you would expect in those territories that have capacity and have strong surveillance system, you would, and of course that are larger, you would have more cases. So our situation in the BVI, I think, one, it may be apparent because the percentage of persons who are actually coming forward, because I suspect a large number of persons aren't even seeking medical attention. So that's one issue. And then the actual testing, right? We have to send tests off to CARPHA. So one could be the surveillance system in terms of the number of cases we're picking up, and then the actual process of confirmatory testing, which takes time. And not every single case will be sent for confirmatory testing. So I think what we have to look at overall is the number of persons and the amount of people who, the burden in the territory. The confirmed cases gives you an idea of that, but then there are other factors as well.
Okay. Now, and given the extent of the impact in other countries and the numbers that we are seeing in the BVI, is it safe to say at this point that the ministry and the Environmental Health Division and whatever other stakeholders you have, is everybody firing on all cylinders at this point?
Yes, everyone is very into the combating this risk to the population, particularly in the Jos van Dyke experience earlier in the year and late last year. A lot of effort was put in by the Environmental Health Department to actually inspect all premises on Jos van Dyke for mosquito breeding, and then to take corrective action. And we also mobilized some community support, and that was actually very good. In fact, the community got on board and they played their part. We didn't get everything we wanted done. There is some unfinished agenda, but I think that effort by the community in Jos van Dyke and supported by the Environmental Health Division is what led to basically the reduction in numbers and finally that outbreak being quelled. Similarly, in Virgin Gorda, we require a similar kind of response. So the Environmental Health Department can do its part, but we also need the community to pitch in as well. Because the Aedes aegypti mosquito really is a domestic mosquito. It's there because of our activity. So to get back to the question, yes, I can say, we are doing everything we need to do and we can do. But of course, there's always room for improvement. We need to do more. And I think the crux of the matter now is that we need to really engage the community, in the effort.
Right, and that brings us right into the point of public awareness. Mm-hmm. And I actually had a previous conversation with the public health communications specialist in the Ministry of Health and Social Development, Ms. Natasha Letsam, and she outlined the ministry's public awareness strategy for combating chikungunya and dengue in the BVI.
The Ministry of Health and Social Development has partnered with the Environmental Health Division as well as the Health Services Authority to launch a very targeted campaign as it relates to chikungunya. And the focus of the campaign mainly is to educate and inform the community about what is being done and what should be done to reduce the mosquito population in an effort of curbing the impact of dengue fever and chikungunya. Well, there's a number of messages that we wanted to get out to the public, and it's being done through a variety of means. Right now we have community meetings ongoing, and so far we've been in Virgin Gorda, where there were 2 meetings that were nicely attended, as well as we have some scheduled for Carrot Bay, West End, Jos van Dyke, and Seacoast Bay. Now the purpose of these meetings is to get to the community. We want persons to come out. We want them to hear what is going on within their respective communities, and we want to give them insight on what they can do to be their own first line of defense. Now, government continues to do what they need to do in terms of going out and conducting house-to-house, premises-to-premises inspections, as well as they have a campaign right now fogging the schools and generally fogging and other things they're doing. But the main aspect of this campaign is we want it ingrained into the hearts and the minds of the community that we need everyone in this battle against chikungunya, because the Aedes aegypti mosquito, the one that's responsible for wreaking all this havoc, is a mosquito that lives in and around your homes. So we want persons to really pay attention to the many messages we'll be sending out. We'll be having initiatives such as audio and video production. We'll continue our community meeting. We're even training various civic organizations to help us get the word out, as well as you can look out for radio and television commercials, various interviews, and other programs. So there's a lot of footwork being done right now as we're trying to spread the message. And now is a good time because, we have a lot of suspected cases, a lot of confirmed cases of chikungunya in the BVI. And right now we have the ear of the public. So we wanted to capitalize on that. So there's so much going on, and we just want the public to really
listen to the key messages. We want you to listen to some of the feedback that we're giving you so you can help us protect the whole territory. We want everyone to do their part in this fight against chikungunya and dengue fever.
So, Ms. Letsom shared what's being done from the public awareness perspective. And as you said earlier, the government and all of its stakeholders are obviously doing what they can in terms of safeguarding the territory and helping to control the spread of the disease. But you also mentioned that it's an individual responsibility. Can you underscore that even further for us and probably provide some tips to the public now as to what they can do within their own households?
Right. As I mentioned, the mosquito really is here because of our activities. The mosquito breeds in usually clear water. The female mosquito must take a bite of blood meal to develop the eggs and then lay the eggs in clear water. So essentially, we live in our houses, in the areas where we work and play, etc., where we are, so we provide that. And then there's the breeding sites. So if you think of around a typical home, the potential for breeding sites. If we have discarded containers which trap water, we have seen in Tortola mosquito breeding in a container, basically a cap of a bottle, traps enough water for a mosquito to breed in. A flower pot with the saucer can trap enough water around the base for a mosquito. If our gutters are not cleared and there's water ponding in our gutters, that is sufficient. Old tree stumps, which may trap water. Old tires, which may trap water. Uncovered cisterns, right? The cistern outflow is not covered. Mosquitoes can make their way into the outflow and lay eggs in the cistern. I mean, other areas would include like tall bush and trees, plants like bromeliads, which tend to trap water, bush, which gives them somewhere to rest. Right, so these are all of the kind of things around our houses, around our workplaces, around our schools, around our playgrounds, around the places where we exist, in which mosquito breeding can exist. So what we can do as individuals is around these areas, we can do a weekly inspection, right? Because the life cycle of the mosquito is basically 1 week. So we can do a weekly inspection and destroy all of these breeding sites. So if it means that there are containers, we can pick them up. If there are areas that we notice where water is collecting, we can deal with it, like cleaning out gutters, making sure cisterns are covered, making sure that we don't have tall bush around our houses, etc. So these are things that individuals can do around the places where they work, play, and live, and which communities can also get together to address.
Right, so the onus is really on the residents themselves to take preventive measures in their immediate surroundings.
Right, and of course the government is there to support through the Environmental Health Division to provide support where necessary.
Right.
And also to do their work, which is primarily the inspection of premises and dealing with insect breeding. Okay. Right.
So the academic year is in full swing. The students are back in the classroom. Are there any specific measures that are being targeted at schools?
Right, yes. We are looking at some things to do with schools. We definitely be going around having talks to schools. So we've been to a few school assemblies, explaining to them about the disease, explaining to them about preventative measures that they can take. We've suggested things like schools doing their own inspections, in addition to whatever the Environmental Health Division may do. We've also suggested that children can use like mosquito repellents, right? Like anything that has DEET or permethrins in it, which they can then use to prevent mosquitoes from biting them. Particularly around dusk or dawn, the mosquito tends to bite more. So around those times, people can wear longer clothes to protect themselves. So really looking at personal protection and then destroying mosquito breeding sites.
While the BVI and the rest of the region continue the valiant fight against chikungunya and dengue, another part of the world is facing another battle on the health front. The Ebola virus disease is wreaking havoc in parts of Africa. Formerly known as Ebola hemorrhagic fever, the disease, according to the World Health Organization, is a severe, often fatal illness in humans. The virus is transmitted to people from wild animals and spreads in the human population through human-to-human transmission. The incubation period, that is, the interval from infection to onset of the virus and its symptoms is 2 to 21 days. The initial symptoms are the sudden onset of fever, fatigue, muscle pain, headache, and sore throat, followed by vomiting, diarrhea, rash, symptoms of impaired kidney and liver function, and in some cases, both internal and external bleeding. Ebola first appeared in 1976 in 2 simultaneous outbreaks in Sudan and the Democratic Republic of Congo. The current outbreak in West Africa, which was first detected in March of 2014, is the largest and most complex outbreak since the initial discovery of the disease close to 40 years ago. Cases have been detected in Guinea, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Nigeria, Senegal, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. While this may be a continent away, given the level of international travel that is prevalent today and the region's heavy dependence on tourism, Ebola is definitely cause for concern. The BVI is actually taking proactive measures to ensure that the disease is kept outside of our borders. Dr. Georges, I'm aware that the Health, Welfare and Social Services Committee of the National Disaster Management Council, that committee met in early September, and you discussed ways to curb the potential introduction of Ebola as part of overall efforts to enhance health disaster management in the territory. Can you enlighten us as to some of the things that were discussed at the meeting and the actions being taken thereafter?
Right, thanks a lot again, Philomena. Yes, we did meet, the committee did meet, and at that time the crux of the meeting was to look at the Ebola threat. As we know, Ebola is present in many countries in West Africa, and there is concern about spread. Currently, the WHO does not state that it's a high threat at this point in time, but of course, like everything else, we need to be vigilant. So, looking at introduction of a new disease into the region, into the territory, really what we look at is strengthening our port health program, and that also comes under the international health regulations. So those are a bunch of regulations which govern international travel and movement of goods, and also protection against the introduction of diseases. So what we did, we met really to sensitize all agencies, get all agencies on board with the issue, let them be aware that this is happening, and also to look at some of the steps which we should be looking to take in the Virgin Islands. And those really centered around strengthening the port health program, right, which looks specifically at screening of passengers, etc., and of goods entering the territory, and then specific actions in case something is found that would be taken. And of course, this involves all partners, all border control agencies, the health sector as well. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you have initiated discussions at that level with ports, immigration, customs?
Right, definitely. We had a separate meeting with border control, again to apprise them and to look at ways of strengthening the existing port health program to deal with this issue. Because as you could imagine, Ebola is here now, but we need to strengthen our port health program to deal with any sort of disease threat that may arise. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, I think we've covered the diseases quite extensively in a very short space of time. Is there anything you would want to say as we put a wrap on this program?
Yeah, I think really critical now is the issue of dengue and chikungunya. And this is related directly to mosquito breeding. And we are in the wet season, in our rainy season. And from time to time, systems move through the territory. I mean, generally speaking, we are dry territory, but from time to time, systems move through and they deposit a lot of precipitation. And particularly where we have high, what we call container indices, meaning lots of potential breeding sites for mosquitoes. After those systems pass through, we are going to see an upswing in mosquito activity. And because these two diseases are now endemic to the territory, an upswing in those diseases. So I think it's imperative on us as a territory and as individuals, as a population, as communities, to take this matter seriously and to look at, at our environments, look at our surroundings, and really deal with the issue of mosquito breeding.
Thank you very much, Dr. Georges. Definitely a very informative discussion. I hope you, the viewers, found it as informative as I did. That brings us to the end of this edition of Focus, a program produced by the Department of Disaster Management. I am Philomena Robertson. Thank you for joining us, and be sure to tune in again next time.